A larger organisation, might have to rely on stock as a buffer, because making changes to their supply chain or their logistics setup is difficult. There's a lot more to it than just moving that product from A to B. There's more moving parts either end. But, in that medium-sized business, I think volatility you can really take advantage of.
Let's jump into it. Chris Roe, thanks for jumping on the podcast, mate. Really appreciate your time. You and I have known each other for a little while, but for the listeners, would you mind giving us a bit of a high level on yourself and your background?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. First of all, thanks for inviting me. I've had a look at a number of the podcasts, and it's a great job that you guys are doing here, and something new and something we don't see a lot in the freight industry. So well done on where it's taken you so far.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Where did I start out in logistics? Well, I guess I was kind of born into logistics. On my grandparents' side, on both sides of the family, one owned a trucking business and one owned roadhouses, right? So, so service stations. So, right from my first days, I was around transport in one form or another. And, whilst I didn't imagine it'd take me where it is today, certainly been part of the grounding in that space. From an international freight perspective, though, my first role in international freight was in country New South Wales for a business called Sunrise. So you'd see the rice products in the supermarkets and so forth. So that was in a rice mill in country New South Wales, and my job there was packing containers for export. Right, so the physical side of it, manually handling goods into the containers. Yeah. But then that also gave me my first look at some key parts of the paperwork, right? So, container numbers and, the recording of data, and even down to batch control for what was going into the containers and building out packing lists and so forth. That was my first taste there. Then I moved to the city, moved down to Melbourne, and found myself a role direct in the freight forwarding. Like most people my age, I started out as a document runner. That was great fun. It gives you a really good grounding. You meet a lot of people and learn a lot of things along the way. Worked my way through import operations, customer service, key account management, sales. From there, I've ran branches, I've ran sales teams, worked for privately owned businesses as well as multinationals in that space. So I guess, there's probably not one thing that I haven't been in touch with at one stage or another. But what I really like about this grounding is, I can be on the floor with the guys in the warehouse, understand and communicate with them, but also take those learnings and turn them into commercial conversations in a boardroom. So really lucky to have had that sort of exposure, and really lucky to have worked with some great people along the way that I've been able to lean into and learn from.
Yeah, nice. Sounds like you've kind of done it all. How did you find that transition from operations through to key account management, then eventually into sales and then leadership? I would assume that would have actually helped quite a lot, as opposed to just being a pure salesperson the whole way through. But what's your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Look, the operations piece, I can't speak highly enough of, and people getting a grounding in that space. It's going to give you a better understanding of the challenges the customers face, because you're on that front line. You're often taking that first call when a customer has a challenge or they've got an issue that they need to solve.
Yeah.
So, you hear that, and, those challenges, whilst can be similar, affect customers differently. So, being able to understand that each situation, whilst the outcomes might be the same, they affect people differently, and how to work with people on getting those outcomes.
Yeah.
And that's translated greatly into customer-facing roles. So, again, going in open-minded, eyes open, asking questions and listening.
Yeah.
How it affects me could be different to how it affects you. And then how we approach that can be two totally different cases again.
Was there any kind of one thing that made you want to say, okay, I want to go into sales and then I want to go into sales leadership? Or was it a case of just sort of trying out various jobs within a freight forwarder, and you sort of found one that you really resonated with?
Look, I've always been ambitious, right? So, one of the things I always did throughout my career was worked as hard as I could to finish my day as quick as I could. And that allowed me to tap someone on the shoulder further up the chain, ask them what they're doing. Is there anything that I can help them with? And even, having a coffee or, a chat around the water cooler, you learn things, right? I wouldn't say that I set out to go into sales and sales management and so forth, but one thing I do really enjoy is leading and helping. And, whether that's from an operational viewpoint, I've run operations teams. I've run 3PLs. I've been a branch manager. And, delving into that sales management piece, working with people, understanding where they're having challenges, how we can help those. And I might not have the answers, right? But I can reach out to other people that I know and explain the situation and get their views and their thoughts.
Yeah.
And, we can apply different methodologies into that. And, that to me is the most exciting bit, is that real coaching, real mentorship and sharing what I know.
No, that's good. And then you've, 25 odd years in the industry, various roles, senior leadership, and you've kind of come to a point now where I think last year you set up a consultancy business or an advisory business, FR8 Advice. Can you tell me what's the story with that, and why did you decide that now was the right time?
Now is the right time? That's probably the $1 million question in that sense. I'll go back to an old boss of mine. I think I was looking at buying my first house, right? And, you're juggling around timing, when's the best time to hit the market and so forth. And he plainly said to me, the best time to do something is when you do it. So from a timing perspective, I'm not sure it was the right time or the wrong time, but it was the time that I wanted to do it and start a new challenge.
Yeah.
And look, the whole basis around it is that everyone over my career, where I've been lucky enough to sit in front of hundreds and hundreds of customers, all with different issues, all with different problems, I found there was a bit of commonality in the gap. And, the gap comes down to, and you'll hear me bang on about it, you'll see it over my socials and so forth, around, 3 core pillars. And that's the people, the process and providers. Individually they can look great, but if they're not connected properly, then that's where the gaps appear. And, that's what FR8 Advice is built around. It's not about coming in and pulling the rug out and making massive changes. We use the term look inside the box, and, that's looking in with the structure you've built, the processes you've got, the people you have, and your providers. We're not here to change providers, but what we're here is to help you and your processes get the most out of those providers.
Yeah, nice. Is your customer base predominantly importers, exporters, or is it the forwarders themselves, or a mixture? Or?
Yeah, no, direct to the importers and exporters at this point. And, we deal with people at different stages in their journeys, so it could be a more mature business that do have the infrastructure, the people, and so forth in play. But they want a sense check on what they're doing, right? And, what looks great on a dashboard isn't always reflective on the effort and everything in the background. So, we're able to have a look at that and put forward some improvements in that space. You've got people who are new to the game. We see a lot of startups, right? A lot of people starting up fashion businesses or products or whatever it might be. And, geez, they can learn the hard way, right? Not au fait with what's happening. For example, guys I've worked with, their supplier said, we'll look after it all. But, it's a CIF shipment. It turns up, they don't realise that there's local charges, customs clearance, all the other nuances that go on with it. And all of a sudden, that blows out of the water on them. But I think the sweet spot for us right now is definitely that medium-sized enterprise. And, it could be a business that's 20 years old, rather mature, founder-led. They've built it on the fly, especially from a logistics point of view. they don't have the internal capacity for a full-time head in logistics to look after everything. Often people are double hatting. They might be procurement, they might be sales, they could be anything, but logistics falls into that space as well. And logistics becomes the last thing that's looked at. And, they do what they can do best, and, it works, but it can work better.
And what do you think, like you've had really good exposure across different businesses now, and now on the import-export side, so direct to the customer, but what do you see, what do businesses get wrong specifically around their supply chain that seems to be maybe a reoccurring theme that you see?
Yeah, look, I think it's set and forget, It becomes a little bit of comfortable inefficiency. You could have great long-standing people working with you. You could have great long-term relationships with suppliers, but that becomes comfortable. And, what was a workaround for a certain situation then can get molded into the process.
Yeah.
And, I think taking the time to really look at that process, map it out and put it on paper, people don't see the gaps until they do that.
Yeah.
And what's in front of them every day might not seem like a risk or seem like an issue because they're used to it. And then identifying that and suggesting change. And sometimes there's a reluctance to change because they feel it's working, but it can work better. So, for me, that is probably something that is a core area and a core space where I think people need to take and spend some more time looking at.
And are you seeing much in the way of, customers that, say if we go down the technology route, customers that maybe need or want to implement some of the latest technologies, they're not sure where to start or kind of where to go. I mean, has that played a part in your experience over the last few years or not so much?
Yeah, so there's a couple of areas there. When you look at older generations and, people of my ilk and so forth, we've grown up with the introduction of, first of all, online tracking, things like that, right? But we haven't really adapted to it well. And, going back to my forwarding days, we always had great tools in that space, but the real uptake on them wasn't great. So, helping people self-serve in that sense and utilising the tools that are there. And I think, too, sometimes as a provider, you feel you're banging your head up against the wall. You're showing a customer what's available, what they can do with it and the ability for it. You still get a phone call, asking a question that's right in front of your customer's face. It's not saying you don't take the phone call and answer that, but I think people adapting to that technology in some generations is slower. But then we've got to think about the new decision makers and the people that are making their way up through these businesses. Now they're going to adapt to technology naturally because it's part of their day every single day. And, I think sometimes the technology has paused a little bit in that space, and we need to relook at that. And how do we serve those people? How do those people then get the most out of what we do via some technology that we can apply?
Coming to the freight forwarding side and how they deal with the importer or the exporter, what would your advice be, if you have any, for how a forwarder should really deal with an importer and exporter, and I guess what a good relationship does look like from that perspective? Let
me just take a step back, I guess. So if a freight forwarder is working with a business that I'm working with, number one, they shouldn't see me as a threat, okay? They should actually see me as an ally, because my number one target is to help engage and educate the user of the freight forwarder on how to use the freight forwarder best. I think freight forwarders are really great at delivering what's asked of them. They work hard, they'll get the space, they'll get the price that's needed and push everything as far as they can. But I think sometimes the customer themselves makes the mistake of not asking for what they actually need. So, instead of saying yes and jumping straight into what's needed, I think a freight forwarder should take a step back and ask a few more questions about that consignment. It might not be the world's most urgent consignment, so it can go on a slower service. It can go on deferred air freight. It's not critical.
Yeah.
But then if you use that same process for something's critical, it's bound to fail. So, really understanding what the needs of a consignment is, and then being able to flex the service around conditions, around what's happening. Asking questions at the start will build you those better executions in the end.
Yeah. No, that's good. Really good. Have you seen much change? I mean, you must have seen quite a lot of change, but what would you say has stood out to you over your career in terms of just maybe the industry in general, or how people are operating, or how customers are buying, if that's buying but habits have maybe changed over the years? Like, what have you seen that has been a bit of a shift?
Look, I think a big shift is the availability of information online. Okay. But it's the interpretation of that information that is the fall down in a lot of places. Okay. If I'm looking to purchase something myself, of course I jump online, review, find out what I can, and can make some decisions there. But you still always need that absolute expertise, to make your mind up, someone who's lived it, someone who's breathed it, someone who knows that here's a potential risk. You're always going to need people like that in your life to make, big decisions. We're not talking about buying a $200 pair of shoes, right? You've got someone with tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock in a consignment. You can't make decisions based off just your own research. You need some expertise around that.
Yeah. No, that's good. And obviously a lot of challenges over the last few months coming out of the Middle East, and that's a pretty dynamic situation. But, I guess you'd be used to that, being in the industry so long. But what are you seeing? What are some challenges from your end that customers are seeing at the moment, or that you're seeing that keeps cropping up, specifically, maybe over the last sort of 6 to 12 months?
Look, I think the challenges is in mindset and process, right? Really. So, volatility is the new normal. I hear people saying, I can't wait till things revert back to how they were, back to normal. But what is normal, right?
Yeah.
Normal's change now. Change is the only constant. And I think, touching back on that medium-sized business, they're the ones that have really got the best advantage, because they're nimble and they're able to adapt to challenge quickly. Rather than that set and forget that we touched on earlier, they can make moves quickly to adjust to the marketplace. A larger organisation, might have to rely on stock as a buffer, because making changes to their supply chain or their logistics setup is difficult. There's a lot more to it than just moving that product from A to B. There's more moving parts either end. But, in that medium-sized business, I think volatility you can really take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like, off camera earlier, we were just chatting a little bit about artificial intelligence and kind of what that looks like in the industry. But, I think there's probably people out there that are maybe a little bit worried about, could it take over my job, and should I be planning for, to change jobs or change industries? But we were sort of saying that we don't necessarily think it is all doom and gloom, and it, as we've seen, it hasn't come out and just replaced a whole bunch of jobs. It's just made people a bit more efficient within their current jobs and what they can achieve within a workday. But are you sort of seeing anything on your end, or what's your view, I guess, on the whole AI thing at the moment?
Look, we're only at the start of the journey, right, in that space. And I think AI, from what I'm seeing within the logistics and within our customer base that we talk with, AI is being used to remove mundane tasks, right? We spoke about previously, a lot of these tasks have been offshored, put into data centers, whatever that might be. But, that's just moving the labor cost into a less costly area. So if that can be automated and built out into something that's more efficient, then why wouldn't you do that? And I think that's where AI currently has its biggest play in the marketplace. Customer impact of that, we're not there yet, in my view. Okay, so customers talking direct to chatbots, AI making decisions on customers' behalves, and so forth. There's quite a way to go till that happens. But I think from making things more efficient, removing mundane administration tasks, and so forth. AI is happening. It's happening now, and it's well on the way. And there's some great results in that. With forwarding being such a competitive space, and margins are tight. Anything that a business can do to help their profitability is only good for a customer in that sense, because your forwarders are more competitive than ever.
Yeah, and I think likewise, it's creating a lot of opportunities as well, right? Because the ability to now go on Claude or whatever you're using, spin up a website and spin up a company essentially, within hours is kind of unbelievable at the moment. So I don't know what you think, but I think that there will be a whole bunch of new startups as well coming through because of things like AI and because of the accessibility of now how easy it is to set up. Not necessarily easy to be successful, but at least to set up and to have a go.
Yeah, definitely. And look, that's going to be there for everything, but you still got to build your credibility, right?
Yeah.
Runs on the board, trust, proof points, all of those sorts of things. And AI isn't going to build that for you.
Yeah.
Right? Doing it is what does it. And, whilst the ability to build something to actually execute and be of value in the marketplace is completely different.
Yeah, no, that's true. And then, what do you reckon the next, generation coming through, whether they're starting freight forwarding businesses or importers or exporters or whoever it is in the logistics space, what do you think that they need to be good at in order to be successful as the industry continuously evolves and changes?
I think don't try to be all things to all people. Find a niche and be really, really good at it. Find a niche that interests you as well. You could be starting out something, in a forwarding sense. And, for me from the country, not that I've ever done it, but, I've grown up around farms, and a lot of my old schoolmates are still on the land and so forth. The logistics and supply chain around agriculture is huge, right? I sort of kicked myself that that's something I never really jumped right into because it's interesting and I know quite a bit about it, having been exposed to it most of my life.
Yeah.
So, find something that you're interested in, find that niche and build that out and become an expert in that area.
Well, never say never, Chris.
This
You never know. What and look, we get a lot of younger people coming through, whether they're coming through our website or they're finding us on LinkedIn, and they're starting to reach out to us, trying to break into the industry, and not necessarily just forwarding, but broader supply chain and logistics as well. Some of these people have just left high school, some of them have just graduated from uni. What would be your advice to the younger people, maybe 18 to sort of 21, that are looking to come in the industry, and why they should think about actually getting into the industry in the first place? What's your view on why we need more people?
Look, logistics and trade is never going away. You look back at some of the oldest laws ever written, and that's maritime law. Bills of lading, they date back to sailing boats and so forth, right? So, this is here, it's here forever. And the opportunities to work locally, yes.
Yeah.
Use those skills to expand globally, are endless.
Yeah.
Just in my own life, I would have never imagined some of the trips that I've been lucky enough to go on work-wise, being through Europe, being through Asia and other places, not just once, but regularly, and then connecting with people globally.
Yeah.
Being able to enjoy the culture. One of the best things I ever remember is sitting with some of the sales team in Vietnam and sitting in where they would eat in Vietnam. Don't take me to a restaurant. Don't show me off. I want to go where you guys go. And, things like that, you just never look back on, and you might not get to experience in a normal life.
Yeah, I love that. And what excites you, about where the industry is going? There is a bit of doom and gloom out there, and some pessimism, but what actually excites you? What keeps you optimistic?
The doom and gloom thing, again, going back to an old mentor of mine, he said logistics is the first thing that will see a downturn, but it's the first thing that sees the upswing. Okay? He used to use air freight in particular as that. Air freight will slow when an economy slows, but when it starts to tick up again, air freight booms. So it is in a cycle, and the amount of change and challenge that I've seen over my years, not one day is the same. So if you're up for learning constantly, if you want to problem solve, if you want to try new things, if you want something to fall over and pick it up again and try it again, then, this is the place to be. It won't stop. It won't stop changing, and it'll always be challenging.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree. I tell people that as well. It's not going to go. It's not going to go anywhere. You always need to move goods from A to B, no matter what the economy is doing. And like you say, even I speak to a few clients, and even in these challenging times, that's actually creating opportunities for these clients as well. So, there is always some good that can come out of a bad situation at a macro level. So, we need more people for sure.
Yeah, and look, I think there's more to it than, the operational side, the commercial side and so forth. We're seeing a lot now with the way that we market businesses. That changes, right? I don't have the skill set, but my 18-year-old daughter, who is brilliant at socials and TikTok and all of those sorts of things, they're just stuff that she's learned at home by herself, and being able to apply that into business, and especially in logistics where, traditionally we're probably a bit slow on that uptake. There's so much more to it than just the traditional mindset. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I really appreciate the discussion, and looking ahead, for yourself and for FR8 Advice, new business. Where do you sort of see, if you had a crystal ball, what do the next sort of few years look like for you in a perfect world?
A perfect world would be obviously the scaling of the business, right? That's always number one. If you're not looking for growth, then you might as well stop in that sense. So always looking for new opportunities there, but also divulging the business into different areas. And something we're working on right now is, whilst we focus primarily on the international logistics space, I'm now working with a customer looking a lot deeper into their stock holdings, how the logistics applies that, how we can get a better return in their business by taking a more holistic view. So, the product offering is expanding there. So from more the international logistics piece deeper into the supply chain. So that's really interesting and exciting as well.
Nice. Oh, that's really good. And where's the best place for people to find you? Is it LinkedIn or your website? Or?
Yeah, look, LinkedIn, my only form of social media. It's we're quite active there on LinkedIn, myself and FR8 Advice. Start there, move on to our webpage, and LinkedIn, my contact details are direct there. Others don't do it. I'm not sure why. Pick up the phone, give me a call.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Chris Roe, really appreciate you jumping on. And yeah, it's been a good discussion to get, your thoughts on where the industry's going and what's happening. And yeah, any final sort of thoughts or anything before we wrap up?
No, look, I think it's been a great chat. It's always interesting to hear what else is going on in the marketplace, and we had a bit of a chat off air around that. Pardon me, but I think if there's people out there who want to see if it can be done better, they might have been doing it the same way time and time again. Please reach out. If it's not to me, reach out to your incumbent, reach out to your current suppliers, whoever that might be. Ask them what's new. Because if you don't ask, you don't get. And sometimes our industry is horrendous at passing on information. So ask and see what's out there.
Yeah. Good way to end it. Chris Roe, thank you so much. I really appreciate you jumping on.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, mate.